So I'm not sure if I should stand up here or go out there and walk amongst you. Or we pretend that we're back at church and I say, please move up to the front. But, thank you for the kind offer of being here today. These are special things. But I'm just floored because I understood when I got here today that Tony Scott was here, somewhat unexpectedly. So now I feel like a bookend. So I got the Army leadership here, and I got Tony Scott, who I was with last night. And I bet you some of the same points that we went through over the past few days that he probably mentioned to you here today, because he's a very passionate leader there, and it's just a breath of fresh air as we work toward the common objectives of how do I move information securely, safely, and how do I do it in our increasingly complex world in which we live in with nefarious actors around us, coming at us from many different streams. That's who I am. Yes, I've been in this DoD CIO now for over 6 years. My, how time flies when you're having fun. It is exciting, and I would tell you what makes it exciting is the people that you work with and the people that you interact with. And in our world, it is both in the military departments, it's in the agencies that belong to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and it's with the mission partners, many of who are sitting here, that you interact with. That's what keeps you going. That's what makes our job fun. Next slide. I've used this thing in many different things. We're not going to talk through it. But as I like to start off with, the Department of Defense, when I deal with my mission partners and so forth, we're a little itty-bitty company. We have one CEO at the top. He has a direct report. When he has an idea or a requirement, he kind of talks about it, and within a couple of weeks, we all execute it, and it's done. And then I wake up from my dream, and I come back to reality, and I figure out, oh, maybe it's not quite that big. This is the part that makes it exciting. DoD is very big, very complex. It is bigger than any large corporation out there. We bring with it many different sets of talents, skills that we have developed, some that we procure, some that we grow, but at the end, we have to manage it. Now, just going through just the sheer number count, if you look at the top left there with the number of people, those are employees, if you will, that for the most part are doing management of information, using information. They're not IT professionals. They're people that are using information to make decisions, to influence other folks, whether you're at the squad, individual level, or at the team platoon. That's what we do in the Department of Defense. It is not just about getting on a ship or on a plane or on a Bradley. Even in those environments there, you are talking about using information, moving information, sharing information. Again, that's what makes this job exciting. We're located around the world, and we have many different buildings that we occupy, some owned, some leased. And we maintain the most up-to-date infrastructure with the latest technical device, the latest wiring, the latest Wi-Fi known to mankind. And then I wake up from my dream again and I realize, okay, we're still working on that. On the right-hand side, just a little bit of the complexity there. Next slide. So what are our priorities? If you've heard Terry Halverson talk lately, it's about 5 different things right now. JRSS, as part of the basic building block for JIE, the Joint Information Environment. How do I change my aging infrastructure built today by different services, agencies, run independently, but connected? How do I change that to reduce my tax space, improve my ability to share my information and know who's getting to it and who I'm sharing it with? And how do I protect that? And how do I bring down my cost? My cost being DoD. One of the announcements that just came out in the news in the past couple of days is the Army's need now to reduce its workforce because of cost. That factor goes across everything, from weapon systems to manpower to IT. In our world, we've been focusing on the IT side of the house. Our second major initiative underneath there is what I would call the Business Process Systems Reengineering. It's a joint thing right now run between the DoD CIO and the Department Chief Management Office, Mr. Peter Levine. But what's a different twist here is we're going through what we call the fourth estate. Those direct reports, organizations that report directly to the Secretary of Defense, and looking at them and how they run their processes, what do they bring as value, and what's the cost of doing that? As part of that, the CIO world is looking at the IT thing. We're going to be working on how do I get the staffs out of running networks, getting staffs out of running servers. They need to be the functional owner of it, the requirements driver of it, but they don't need to employ the workforce that reports up to that senior official and says, sir, I turned on the lights today and all green lights were there and so forth. We don't need to be doing that. Because at the end of the day, there's no one system that stands totally by itself. If it is, I don't need to worry about its network because it's not talking to anybody. The third thing is going back into the spectrum side of the house. About a year ago plus, worked out a deal with the FTC under congressional operation to share back the spectrum. And part of that is now how do we retrofit many of our warfighting systems to make them compatible into the spectrum space that we can operate in, and to manage that over the next few years as we go through that process. That's a long-term project, and is going along quite well. It is also ties in with what I call the modernization piece here. The other one is dealing with the cybersecurity piece. Basic defense, as Terry puts it. How do I invoke that in today's thing? And I think Mr. Scott probably talked about it, and probably every other speaker talked about it. Cyber is everywhere around us today, and the security of that and the security of our information is what we're concerned about. And then finally, our workforce. How do I grow the IT workforce? And you could throw in there the cyber workforce. And from the CIO perspective, we're cognizant of both, and it's not just the offensive cyber and the defensive cyber thing that does the reaction things to incidences and monitoring the networks, but it's those system administrators that sit at home in our office spaces and operate those networks. So let's go through the things one by one. Integrate IT modernization. You know, one of the things that we have today here that we've been driving hard across the MilDeps and across DoD is getting rid of the legacy stuff. We still have many different networks out there operating on ATM, SONET, and a few other things that industry has moved away from now for several years. Other than a few other federal agencies, I think no one else is using some of that technology today. How can I change it? The Army strategy on how to improve their network says we've got to get rid of some of the old stuff. That's the old stuff we got to get rid of. We got to move quickly off it. What goes hand in hand with that, though, is how do I modify, how do I influence the acquisition process? Because I can't go through a laborious process that says, define for me your requirement, go through the series of boards, whether it be inside the military departments or inside DoD as a whole, justify it, procure the funds, get it on contract, and have that process take more than 2 years. IT has changed in that time period. So the things that you put forth in the RFP, it is no longer relevant by the time you come out the end of it. But this is not a new sentence that I've said. We've been saying this thing for a couple of years now. But we've got to keep working on that, both from the vendor community as well as inside the government, to keep changing that. I think the change breaker in that is the fact that we're going more towards services now. We're encouraging people, don't go buy your own stuff. Do not put your RFP in there that says, I need to have a system that can do X, Y, Z. Put it in terms of a capability. And we're driving hard onto the acquisition process to look at it in a different light. They're saying, how can I go to market with this thing? Mr. Frank Kendall has laid out the Better Buying Power 3.0. These are the basic tenets inside there. How can I go rapidly? How can I buy the things as a commodity? How do I buy it as a service there? There are several initiatives now, and I'm not sure if Tony Scott talked about it, but at the federal level, we're trying to put in place some contractual vehicles that allow us to either buy service or buy infrastructure more at the enterprise level, so we all know what the same price is. And you, the vendors out there, also know this is what I'm offering, and here's the price, and here's how I can market it to the federal space. But again, many of us are now on the cusp of, I want to get out of running my own stuff there. What's also important is it's not so much about the infrastructure and the systems. They are there. But let's look at where the data is. How is that data produced? Who owns that data? How is it stored? For the past year plus, if you drive like I do going into work and you listen to WTOP, you hear about the cloud. Move to the cloud. The cloud will save you. The cloud will help you. The cloud will save you many money. Maybe. But it is about the data. And then how do you store that data? Where do I put it? The cloud is wonderful, don't get me wrong. But I got to get it as a service. I have to secure it. I have to know what my data is and what my app is that's getting to it. And then how do I control the access to that in a timely fashion there? One of the major initiatives that we're underway right now, kind of tying the bridge between the cloud and the community, is the medical side of the house. We're about ready to release or award, based upon the RFP that went out for the DeHMSM contract, that lays out, this is what we want to move toward the next medical record system here for the department there. That will begin to go IOC in 16 and come online within 17. Huge change. That RFP kind of put the requirement out there, so we want vendors to come back and tell us, how can you provide us this service? But we're not looking at owning it like we did with the past two systems, where I had the government-owned system or I put COTS in place, and I had to spend all my money trying to sustain that thing or build in the new tech refresh. The other thing that's driving the change here is, across the Department of Defense, who do you think the majority of the users of the medical system are? The forces or the dependents? It's the dependents. We spend much more money taking care of the dependents, which help the warrior do his job, but don't get me wrong, that's where the money is. And guess where the dependents go? Sometimes they go to the on-base facility, but a lot of times they get referred to outside clinics in the local communities. What is different about my wife if I live on base and she goes outside to the clinic, or if we lived on the community outside and we went to that community? Nothing. Do I care about her medical records? Yes, I do. Does she care about them? Yes, she does. But I don't care if I own the system that it sits on. I need to have the reliability and the surety that that thing is protected. But more and more, I like to have that. I like to know that if I go to a specialty clinic here for my back, and I go here for my ear, nose, and throat, that I don't have to pay, through my insurance now, 2 or 3 different scans and surveys and questions. It just gets transferred. It gets shared. Fundamental change. And that's what we're driving there. And I think you're going to see some real changes that are coming up in the next couple of years as this thing begins to roll out. Huge effort there with the Veterans Affairs, but also across Health and Human Services. Again, because the outside world is catching up to what we've been doing inside the military now, of sharing this stuff and documenting this stuff on the electronic side of the house. Another community of interest, I spent close to 30 years in the Army. If you said to me, I'm from the intelligence, I said, go over there. Put your stuff on your own thing. You got lots of money, just go buy your stuff. If you were logistics, I said, go over there. You got lots of money, go put your stuff over there. If you were medical, I said, you really got a lot of money, you go over there. And now we're looking at saying, that's all about information. How do I share that stuff? How do I break that stuff down? We're now building in through the infrastructure modernization, the IT modernization. How do I build a common highway system there so those things ride across it? And I don't have to buy different transmission pipes for each one of those systems. I don't have to buy satellite time specially just for the IC side of the house or for the intelligence side. It's just common transport. I have to know what's going across it. I have to know what my demand is. I have to know how to secure it, protect it. But I don't need to have everyone buying their own stuff. The other change is we're increasingly more and more a mobile force. But we're trying to get away from, like in my case, I have a laptop, I have an iPad, I have a BlackBerry, and I have my own personal phone. Why do I need to have all those things there? We're getting away from that. We've rolled out in the past year, and we're now on version 2.1, I think it is, of the secure mobile phone that is based off a commercial product that we have worked with industry on, and how do we secure it, manage it, and put it in the hands of the warfighter there. Our challenge now is how can I move fast enough to get the procurement in and get those things into the hands of folks. We're breaking through those things. That's the exciting part of this thing here. Cyber discipline, we talked a little bit about that. Probably the change in thrust right now is, and you've seen several different things, and I bet you Mr. Scott talked about it this morning. Leadership at the top is now talking about it and starting to enforce it. We've had talk on it, but even now the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary are now taking action, and they've done it with different letters to direct reports saying, hey, on a recent inspection we found this. You have now X number of days to get this thing fixed, or you will be turned off. Before there were pockets of that, the Air Force did it a few years back, the Army's done it on a few things. But I would tell you from the OSD perspective, if we ever thought about doing that, you didn't have the leadership willpower behind it. We have that. That's the exciting part. And it echoes down through from the civilian leadership down through the military piece. You're going to see more of that coming up here across the federal space too here. I think Tony Scott talked about some of that this morning here too. Finally, the cyber workforce. I guess my biggest challenge there is we had many programs for years about how to train up the acquisition workforce. The IT workforce, the cyber workforce, was kind of left off on its own. And then we took in programs and we did it for specialty things like the 53s and how do you do it on routers and how to do basic system administration. If you were into the security side of the house, I would send you off and get your basic cybersecurity accreditation stuff there. They were somewhat controlled through the individual departments, but never holistically across the board there. We're now trying to integrate that and make it standardized so that we can move these cyber forces back and forth and know that they're properly trained to the same certification side of the house there. That's what makes this whole thing exciting there. I'm going to get off my prepared stuff now because I want to spend time answering questions and just dialoguing. So I hope there are some questions out there. Okay. Can I pick and choose?
Need some help. Some of the handwriting.
These are all good, and I will talk about all of them. The first one, though, I'll go to is what lessons can DoD learn from yesterday's challenges at United Airlines, Wall Street Journal, and New York Stock Exchange? I don't think it's any new lessons for us. What you're finding now is on the commercial side out there, they're experiencing our world. I addressed a club or a group of commercial CIOs about a month ago, and my opening comments was, it's great to be here. Welcome to my club. And I said, here's my club. My club is, I was worried about cybersecurity for years. And I had to pay extra for it. Every time I put a contract down the street, every time I wanted to do a procurement of some sort, I had to factor in security, and it cost me money. And when I turned around to my vendor community, they'd say, well, you want this, so it's going to cost you more. And I would go to my DHS friends or somebody else and say, well, I don't have to pay that kind of price. Why do you have to pay that kind of price? And you had that comparison. You say, oh, well, you mean if I don't put this statement in there, I only have to pay $1 on this thing? Well, I'll take that out. And so that we created the world in which we live in that I have some security in there and some not, and it's not uniformly applied to. The federal government took this thing more seriously a few years back, so they started doing it. But then it was the government against the commercial side of who was going to pay what money, and the banks and the travel industry and so forth said, it's not important to us because we run our own networks, we do our own things. Now in the last 2 years, they've joined our club because they became targets. And they realized, wow, we're all in this together here. And so what's exciting now is we should all be on the same playing field. We need to protect the information that we have. And I need to do it effectively, both in cost and in what systems I put together there. So I say, welcome to my club. You're now on my side of the street. Let's go do this thing together here. Now what I think we're working on is, how do I share that information? Because before, and I'll just say us in DoD, we would say, if I know something, I have to protect my source. So I'm going to protect my source by classifying this. And so I produced a classified system that would track things. That was information. And only if I read you into a special thing and had to pay more money to have you get those certifications and that kind of stuff, could I share that with you. It then became those who had and those who did not have. We're now getting into the mode of what can I share, because the biggest source of cyber threat activity, if you will, are the commercial vendors out there. They run networks. They see traffic. They see things inside there. So if they're sharing it to themselves and they're willing to share it with other corporations, why don't we all share this thing? Why is it suddenly, if it's known by DoD, it has to become classified up here? So they're working through those things. And there's an amount of level of security that you can exchange that information on without having to go classified. And those are changing daily here, and that's a good thing. If you go through the United Airlines, that's not unlike how DoD has been operating for years. They talked about the two airlines coming together. They had different type systems, different data schemas, and they had to figure out how to make their back office, and as well as their front producing screens, work together here. So they probably hired a whole bunch of vendors to come in and help kludge these things together over the past couple of years. And it worked. I mean, I could go online as a consumer, order up my airline ticket, and get it. I didn't care how kludgy that system was behind the thing. As long as I got a ticket for the right price and the airplane showed up on time and took off on time, I was okay. What's coming out of that thing now is the fabric behind there, this kludginess of these systems, it can, because Murphy's alive and well, it can react in there that it will bring it down. And that's what's being exposed here. It's not good or bad. It is how it got there. And the fact is, and I think Tony may have talked about some of that today, is you got to have time to take things down and fix it too here. So, I'm not going to go into any further on this thing, but you read the papers here about that we took things offline at OPM for this equip thing. I liken it to this. If I look back at when we produced some systems that even do our own manpower stuff inside the Army or inside DoD, I bet you they were not made in the last 3 or 4 years. They probably weren't made, coded, in the last 10 years. They are where they are today. We rely upon them to do our business and our mission. And over time, leaders have had to make risk management decisions. Given dollars, given mission, where do I put my precious resources here? And they took risk. It's not good or bad. It's what they did at the time. They had to do that. We all had to do that. The point is, at some point in time, you got to say, it's now time to take it off. It's like your house. You can defer a maintenance or painting of a door trim and so forth, but at some point in time, either your wife or somebody's going to say, you got to paint that door and fix it up there. You got to put the money into it. Same thing with all of our systems here. We haven't really calculated that on many cases, unless it's a program of record. But then look at what we do to programs of record. We keep chopping their budgets down. So I think it's exciting from that side. It's welcome to my club of what those 3 instances happened there. And I think it's also showing to the nation and to the world, this is now pervasive to everything that we have here. And we got to look at this thing holistically. This is where the vendor community has to help us out too. It's no longer just a DoD thing. We talked earlier today about interoperability with allied and coalition partners. How does your office contribute to that effort? A lot. So I think there's a panel after me about the mission partner environment. The mission partner environment is, I call it a use case. It's a specified thing inside the JIE.
of how do I share information with my mission partners. Who are my mission partners? It depends. If there's a natural disaster and we're reacting to it, and we get called up in the military to send help there, it's in the form of our troops and our civilian folks that go out there to help them. It's our communicators that arrive on the spot. That's my mission partners, and they're forming communication links and supply lines and so forth with FEMA and the other NGOs that are showing up there. If I'm overseas, it's my host nations, but then we get a little bit, we look at the information we have to share, and we say, well, you can share this with that country, but not with that country, and you can share this part with that one, but not that one, and this stuff you can share with all those guys. That's my mission partner environment. It's complex. There's not a single system you can put there, because just to go through that paradigm there, I'd be buying different infrastructures to handle that. I could not afford it from the infrastructure side of the house or from the operations side of the house. And the poor operator who had to talk to all those things would probably wind up with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 systems there in front of him. We learned that during Afghanistan. We broke down some things where leadership changed the policy in certain things, and we will continue to do so. And now we're working at across the international world with the MPE, and I'll leave that for the panel members to talk about that some more. But very much so, and it's been, having been involved with the early days of JIE and so forth, that was always our concern, was how do I share information with our mission partners? To me, JIE enables that, but mission partners gets back to the coalition folks saying, I want to know that I'm getting there too with you. I would tell you what it is not. It's not about buying a whole different set of systems for every partner that we have out there. There's some confusion in industry regarding what goes into the DISA cloud and what will not. Specifically, is OSD directing the Army to move its ERP to the DISA cloud? If so, why? The answer to that last question is no. Our policy has been do the business case analysis, fit the data and the app to the right place where it needs to go to for the mission and for the cost that you put into it there, and then make sure that you conform and meet the security requirements that we've laid on for the data that you're putting out there. It's almost as simple as that. Nowhere did I say, you will go to DISA. Now, a couple years ago, it had been, go do your stuff, broker it through DISA. Last year, Mr. Halverson signed out the change to that said, go do your BCA, work with the vendor corporation, work with what the requirements are, do your BCA, look at the best business value there, but you got to tie all that stuff together there. When you bring it all together, and we're working hard now on what is the rates that DISA applies to both their computing side as well as to the DISA side, you're going to see those things change, but so is the industry. I would tell you that if I can get the right security and the right dollars, or cost, if you will, I would love to get rid of a lot of infrastructure that we have. We are not beholden to X number of buildings off that first slide that I must hang on to because this is my raison d'etre for either DoD or for DISA. Now, our board of directors might have a difference on that, but our board of directors being the Congress, because as soon as I start taking a job or a building and closing it, I don't care what's inside it, then they have a voice in it too. But as it is, we are continuing to close data centers across the 4 services and across DoD. There's an effort underway, consolidating, if you will, the infrastructure and how we operate the networks inside the Pentagon. Am I moving data centers and closing data centers there? No, but I'm also finding things that you could never imagine that would be there. And we are taking care of those things too as we go through it. And I would love that we could make partnerships with vendors out there that allows us to use their expertise, their ability to scale rapidly, their ability to secure, because again now, their requirement is not unique to DoD. Theirs is to customers who put their information and applications in their data centers, whether it be a bank, a medical, or DoD type stuff. Now, within there are still different levels of importance of data that needs to be considered there. And for some of us, right now, the current thinking is that for level 5 data, which is the classified stuff, that for the time being, that's going to probably be into a government-owned type thing, even though a lot of vendors still operate that thing. But it's on our property there. To summarize this question, we've heard from the Air Force and so forth. Is the Department of the Navy really on board with the JIE and JRSS? Yes. Yes. So it's like, I think, probably in the panel this morning, I think it probably came up there somewhere, that within the JIE spectrum and moving to JRSS, there's not a movement to go underneath that JRSS or inside that JRSS mechanism uniformly against all 4 services. There is a mapping of where they will be moving in as we build that thing out and we consume their environments there. For example, the Air Force, they've already done a lot of heavy lifting on standardizing their installations and how they manage their IT, similar to what the Navy did over a decade ago with NMCI. We've got the first triad in of the JIE, of the JRSS. As we turn that on, we're moving in the Army installation down there. They're doing the testing, and we're going to be moving probably in the next couple of months there. I can move an entire region of the Air Force overnight because of how they're currently constructed and how they're running there. We're going through the checks on that. That's just a methodical process there. And the DON is in much the same way, and so is the Marine Corps. And as we go through the budgets and we look at things, a lot of what had been former requirements are now changing a little bit too. It's amazing what the type budget will do. These are the 4 that I had here. Do you have some more? Good question. General Williams still in the room? So please discuss plans to reform DoD IT acquisition per NDA. So are we talking about the 804? Are we talking, which NDA were we talking about here? Bottom line is, the IT acquisition is part of the better buying power of the department. There's a whole section in there devoted to it. And then there's a new one coming, another DoDI 5000, which should be released shortly by Mr. Kendall, dealing with services. Services being anything that's IT or other professional services there. I would tell you that the policy is changing. How it gets acted on in the field and by the commands is the art of this thing here. But it's not fair to put all the blame on the commands out there trying to do it. It's shared from all the way from the guidance and how we do budgeting and how much money gets put together and how it gets flowed down and gets earmarked against things, as well as how you put your requirements together. I'm on several different working groups with Mr. Kendall and also with Ann Rung from OFPP on how do we put these things together there. It is a thorny issue here. As I said before in my first slide, DoD is kind of big. The Army, a couple years ago, put together a Microsoft ELA. Was that done in a couple of months? No. It took a lot of work, both internal to DoD, the Army, and the agencies that participated with it, to gather the requirements, to lay out the monies and to do that, and then to do the whole negotiation piece. So I'm talking that through both sides here. If you do that for every commodity and every large enterprise licensing, that's a very time-consuming thing. So we just had this discussion on a very large acquisition that's coming in place, and there's a lot of emphasis on getting it through quickly. And I sat through the brief, and I said, so why is this thing all the way out here to, I don't get to see a contract award, and this is just for services. Why do I see this thing until the end of 16, when all these milestones are up here right now that we're going through them? I said, by the time this thing goes to award in 17, at the end of 16, beginning part of 17, I guarantee you my environment has changed, that I'm acquiring this service for. The acquisitioners, I'm not an acquisitioner, the acquisitioners in the room said, oh, but Mr. DeVries, that's a really good fast time. I said, well, that doesn't do it for me. And I said, I probably don't speak for all the departments out there, but that does not do it for me. Why do I have to have this much time in here? Now, this is where it comes into the art of somewhat of the vendors, too, is, well, once you put the RFI out, once you put the RFP out, and I put my bid in, I got to do my source selection, I got to do this and that, depending upon the size, complexity, and all that, it may take that time. But we got to help, we have to work this thing together and how I move that thing to the left to shrink that time down. And then, I'll probably get blasted here by my vendor friends here is, but then I can't have protests every time I turn around, too. I mean, let's put the stuff on the table right up front. Let's work on the competition side of the house here. And that's easy for me to say because I'm not sitting on the vendor side of the house, but we spend a lot of time doing protests, and that just hurts everything from the defense side of the house. Reference the involvement or the evolvement of the medical system and the eventual civilian contract. What is the plan for security oversight of PII? So let's be straight up on this thing. PII, HIPAA, intelligence, all that is factored in on everything you do with your data. PII is just a category that we've had around for years that kind of puts its arm right there. That's why we wrote out the security requirements guide, and we're going to update it every 6 months. We're getting to that stage now of providing the next update on it. I'm responding back now to a question that said, you're now putting a speed bump in here, Mr. DoD CIO, because you're telling me before I can begin to do the RFI and the RFP on this thing, I have to do X with a vendor for a cloud and so forth, and for a medical thing. And I don't think I have to do that because your DoDI, which dates back 4 years, doesn't specifically state that. Okay, hello. Welcome to my world. The threat has changed. It's evolved. We put the SRG out. We're updating that every 6 months there. And there's not a program manager out there or vendor that can stand the risk of doing something silly here of not putting the right security stuff in it. We're working hard across NIST to include all the vendors out there of what's the appropriate security thing to put into each of these cloud solutions or storage solutions there. This PI is not a separate add-on. The oversight is there from the get-go. We will be doing that through the reviews of the RFPs that they go out, as well as the plans that come back in. And of course, when it comes time to turn on the data and examine it, that's open to the same thing there. How does the NSA accreditation process of secure devices speed up? How can they, I guess, to address the rate of pace of modernization that we talked about here? That's our challenge. Again, NSA does a great job of taking type 1 encryption, if you will, and other type encryptions and defining what the requirement is and putting the best mind powers behind it there. They will continue to do that. We've got several programs underway right now of re-engineering and replacing what we call the legacy communication security devices there. That will continue on. We're also looking at is how do I do good enough security using commercially available devices that heretofore, before I said that must be a type 1 or a type 2, that maybe I can use these commercial ones. And we're doing some of those pilots with NSA working with us out in PACOM and some other AORs. Those will continue. And I think there's a lot of promising things. Why? Because we have more members in our club. Remember, our club says, I need to store data, share data, secure data. Welcome to my club. Before, it was just DoD, and we were buying our stuff separately, manufacturing it separately, saying only my stuff is good enough. Now we're all in the same club. I'm out of questions. In an earlier panel, the DISA rep said that the JIE will not have the same COE as the Intel community, i.e. eyesight. Since all commanders will need access to Intel, this does not make sense. It means more than one operating version, not a common one. How can we have joint? I'm not sure what the word COE means in this thing here. Is Center of Excellence? Common operating environment. Okay, so I don't agree with that statement. We're working hard. We have a joint a panel that does the standards in interoperability that we formed up 3 years ago between the eyesight world and the DoD or the JIE side of the house. Those standards are there. How you implement them, though, is left up to commands and vendors alike. How many standards do we have out there today and just inside this pure, clean, neat family called DoD? Oh, let's just pick on one. How do I do collaboration? How do I do collaboration on the battlefield with a simple like capability where I can text you with the thing and maybe do a common chat room with you? There's one standard put out. How many different systems do we have out there? So is it a standards problem, or is it a how do I implement it? How do I have to tie these things together there? We're still using Merck Chat. We said that was bad 10 years ago. Operationally, we said, oh, I can't get off it because I'm using it in a deployed situation and da-da-da. That's leadership. That's called timeout. Get off it. Other things will fit that bill, can fit that bill. We put the standard in place for XMPP and said this would be the standard to drive the interoperability so that the vendors can make their systems work together. So I don't have to get locked into one single vendor. I can do the competition. I can tie things together, and I can communicate. There is single standards. There's single standards of encryption side. We're working on, the other part that's important is not so much the standards there, but it is on the identity. Dave DeVries should only be known one time. And as I transverse between the unclassified side to the secret side to the top secret side, I don't want to have to re-verify myself or come up with 3 different credentials or 3 different ways of spelling my name when it shows up someplace. Those standards we're also working on because we came at it from different platforms, different positions. In the IC world, they came at it from years ago of saying, I want to know everything about you, Dave DeVries, and I'm going to put you in this repository, and therefore I know you, and this is what it is. On our unclassified side across DoD with our CACs, I said, okay, you came into the service, I need to have good enough, I need your birth certificate and that kind of stuff, I'm going to now credential you. If you went through a security thing to get a secret clearance, I kind of tacked it on, but for the long time we said, I'm not going to worry about this secret stuff, identity now, to get you access onto the thing. Now we're doing that. We had those CAC cards out there on the secret side of the house. Now we're driving the populace. Why do I have 2 different things here? I may have to have 2 different cards, but why do I have to have 2 different ways to cut them? Why do I have to have 2 different ways of knowing what the underlying supporting structure is to authenticate that that's really the same Dave DeVries? It should be the same one. We're smart enough, vendors are smart enough, to come up with cross domains that I don't have to have all these different point-to-points, but I can bring up the enterprise level one that we can put these filters on. We have some of those. Our challenge is how do I scale those things out across our big, broad community here in a rapid, timely fashion and come up with the dollars to do so? Because right now the dollars are all tied up in buying these things individually and separately. So it's a chicken and egg problem. It's how do I know what's being spent? How do I take that money and put it towards something? But I got to provide you something, a capability, rapidly and reliably for what you were just buying for separately yourself. What is your view on Undersecretary Carson's and General McChrystal's proposal to bring senior corporate executives into the military? This seems like it might be doable with the cyber IT community. Thoughts? I will confess I'm not that familiar with that from a senior level. I know they were talking about doing a lot of transfers of how do I take military and civilian, if you will, or even federal civilians and industry civilians, and move them rapidly back and forth. So I can spend 3 years here and then go spend 3 years back there and not get penalized in either world with it. I think there's a growing appetite for that. We're on the cusp of doing some of those same things right now with some exploratory work in Silicon Valley and possibly here on the East Coast. We've had a program inside DoD where we've had it going both ways, but so far in the past 3 years, we've only had industry bringing in people that they work with us for a year or up to 3 years. We gain their knowledge. They gain knowledge of how the department's running on certain things, and then they go back. And we've got enough lawyers involved in that, so we know how to firewall things and do that kind of protection. We're looking at how do I take a civilian workforce and put them out with the industry, other than the programs that already exist today, the training with industries, the various educational ones that we have already set up there. As the DoD moves to JIE, is there concern over the impact a single incident can have on a network, similar to the NMCI intrusion in 2013, or more recently, the OPM incident? So we're not moving to a single thing. Right now, I think I'm pretty well secured out there with all those networks that you saw there, because I have no way of knowing what I have out there. That's not a good feeling to have. You're secure by what you don't know. I'd rather know that I know and know that it's secure. JIE will enable that, just as the Air Force has been doing it, and the NMCI, now Engine, has been allowing that force to manage, control, see to the endpoints in their community. Not unlike what a lot of corporations have been doing for a few years now. When you go out with industry and you talk to them, what's your biggest concern about your terminals, your endpoints? It's how do I secure it? How do I know who's connected to my corporate environment? How do I control that? It's no less different for us. So it works. JIE would do that. It is not about putting everything into one big common pipeline that everyone sees, everyone knows. There is security built in there. There's also more analytical work that can be done on what traffic it does see, so it can pick up those anomalies that heretofore are only known at certain points, and you could have them running rampant throughout there. The OPM breach was, that was a fact that, just like everything else, you don't know what you don't know. So if I got squirrels running loose in my attic and I don't know it, they're still in there. It's only when I see the damage and I see a few other tracks around there do I know I have squirrels in my attic. I got to do something about that. Same thing. In every incident that we have here, it's been reactionary. I've seen squirrels in my house, whether it's in a commercial system or in a DoD system or in another agency system. I found tracks, and now I got to take action on it. That's reactionary. We're trying to get out of that to where I can now protect it and not spend my entire budget on just a whole series of things that I have no hope of protecting that thing. Easy question. The JIE is not currently a program of record. Should it be? No. Absolutely no. Give me an example of a large-scale program being both numbers of endpoints and so forth, and or dollars. I don't care. They're kind of synonymous. How fast can you get it? Does it come on time? And does it really deliver what you thought it would? No. I can't name a single one. I don't care how important it was to national security and everything else, any large program. And then you put the word joint in front of it, well, that just opened up all kinds of opportunities there. What is JIE? It's a framework. It consists of a variety of things in there. It consists of the IT modernization piece. It consists of the cybersecurity. It consists of the big data analytics. It consists of how do I operate the network, how do I do the echeloning between Cyber Command, DoD headquarters, the component services cyber commands, and the operations on the ground. It includes all that. It includes my interface with my iSight partners, who for the most part operate on their high side network, but they have requirements from the lower class side networks too. We are in this together, and it's that framework that enables it. And I need those programs that rely inside there to understand their framework, and then how do I tie those things together there. That's why I do have programs of record inside there. I need to know how they're connected and what their funding is and what they're actually buying. Because gone are the days now where I can let Army go out and buy an IT contract for XYZ. When I look at XYZ, it looks an awful lot like a JRZ stack. And now I'm finding out that they're putting it into the Pentagon someplace. That's where we're putting a stop on. I just pick on the Army because I'm standing here today with the Army. So, other questions for me? It is a pleasure being here. I would tell you, I enjoyed close to 30 years in the Army. It is because of people like you, and I see a lot of old mentors here, former mentors. You're not old, but former mentors and leaders. I've seen vendors here that I've worked with both in the uniform and also in the past years. It's you that keeps the department running today, and I just want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you for having the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.